Good morning, Year 6, and welcome back to Maths. We're going to be continuing with ratio today, but we're going to look at a slightly different side of ratio, which is called proportion. And we're going to be looking at recipes and how we can upscale or downscale recipes. So if you're hungry, this lesson is not going to help because we're going to be looking at recipes. Before we do that, though, let's get our starter done. So pause the screen here. There's 6 questions for you to do, and then we will go through the answers. Okay, so first things first, 0.5 times 1,000. Timesing by 1,000 shows me I need to move 3 jumps on my place value grid. 1, 2, 3. Replace everything else with a placeholder. The decimal would remain there, so actually my answer would be 500. Okay, 12.5% of 600. Now, I put 12.5% on purpose to see whether you remembered that 12.5 is the same as finding an 8th. Now, there's 2 ways you could do this. You could do it as percentage like normal, find your 10s, find your 1s. You'd need to half the 1% to find 5%. Or you could actually just find an 8th of 600. And to find an 8th of 600, oops, not 800, an 8th of 600, we need to divide by the denominator. Let's do this instead. If you did the percentage way, let's see if we get the same. 8 into 6 doesn't go. 8 into 60 would go 7 times because that would be 56, remainder 4. And then 8 into 40, oh, there we are, nice and easy. An 8th of 600 is 75, which is the same as 12.5%. Okay, a fraction times a whole number. We times the top, which would give us 5 over 2. You don't need to do anything with that. You can leave it. It doesn't divide exactly. Fraction add fraction. Let's choose our common denominators. I'm going to choose 14. This one had been times by 2, so the numerator times 2 is 6. This one had been times by 7, so 1 times 7 is 7. Add those 2 together, 13 over 14. And we've got another fraction of a number now. We introduce that up here. We've got 8ths again, but this time it's 3/8 of 160. Now, actually, I was about to do bus stop. We don't even need it because 160, if we cover that placeholder, we can divide that by 8 very quickly because 16 divided by 8 is 2. Put the placeholder back on, gives us 20. Now, that is 1/8 of 160. We need to then times the top to give us 60. Okay, the last one, I'm just going to make it a little bit bigger so that we can work through this one. The numbers in this sequence increase by 45 each time. Write the missing numbers. Now, I'm going to start the easier ones by adding 45 to these ones. And then I need to add 45 again. Now, this bridges. If you need to do a calculation, oops, sorry, that's a bit messy. If you need to do a calculation, there is no problem with doing that. That's 13 and 3. Most of you could have done that in your head, I would say. However, this one, we are going backwards 45 because we need the inverse there because this is counting forwards. This missing number has gone backwards. So we need to subtract 45, which would give us 110. Nice and easy. Okay, here's our big question for today. And if you can't see it exactly, I will talk through it. Because, as I said, we're going to be looking at recipes. Now, this is a real life skill because you will get given a recipe that says, oh, it serves 2 people or it serves 10 people or whatever it might be. And actually, if your family size or your party size that you're making your food for is different, you need to use an element of ratio and proportion to make sure that the ingredients stay in the same proportion they were meant to be, but at a greater value. Okay, so you're not going to be able to do this straight away, but let me just talk you through the kind of question we're looking at. So here are the ingredients for a chocolate ice cream. Cream is 400 milliliters, milk is 500 milliliters, egg yolk is 4, chocolate is 120 grams, and sugar is 100 grams. Stefan only has 300 milliliters of cream to make chocolate ice cream. How much chocolate should he use? Now, this is that whole idea of the actual proportions, and by proportions I mean parts. If I flick to the vocab quickly, a part, a share, or a number considered in relation to the whole. Very similar to ratio. The proportion of cream needs to be accurate, because if actually he does everything else at 400, 500, but actually changes only one of the ingredients to 300 millilitres, the proportion of cream to everything else will be wrong and therefore won't taste right, or if it was a cake, maybe it wouldn't bake right. You need to keep the parts in their same ratio, but if you're changing one of them, remember we learned that rule, if you're changing one part of the ratio, you have to change all of them. So this question is then saying, if you only have 300 millilitres of cream, this one, rather than the 400, what would the rest be? And specifically, they're asking about the chocolate. So let me talk through, there's a couple of ways to do this really. You can look at it as kind of fractions and you can look at it as ratio. I'm going to talk about ratio to begin with. Now, if they're asking about cream and chocolate only, this is a nice easy ratio. Actually, there should be 400 millilitres of cream. There's my colon, sorry, so you can see it properly. To 120 grams of chocolate. But what they're saying is actually we're only going to be using let me just move that down actually, and you'll see why in a moment. We're actually only going to be able to use 300 millilitres of cream. So how much chocolate will there be? Now, what we're used to doing here is being able to times or divide by something to get from here to here using our multiples and here to here. The reason I've left a gap here, some of you might straight away think, well, 300 is 3/4 of 400, and you could actually times by 3/4. However, that might be a step too far for some of us. What I recommend doing is get to a middle ratio. Simplify this one, which will help you get to this one. It's almost like a little stepping stone. So nice and easy, I think, would be to get to 100 here. Now, to get from 400 to 100, I've divided by 4. Now, just check that actually 120 can divide by 4, which it can, but you would need to pick something that was a common factor, sorry. So we need to divide by 4 here. Now, covering that placeholder, 12 divided by 4 is 3. Put the placeholder back. Now, because I've got this middle ratio, the proportions are still the same, okay? If instead of having 400 millilitres to 120 grams, it would be the same proportion at a lower amount to have 100 millilitres to 30 grams. But that proportion that the recipe has stated is still the same, which means now I can do my final jump, which is now times 3 here. 100 times 3 is 300, which means over here would need to be times 3. Oops, which would give me 90. And that is my final answer. Now, if you were thinking of it as fractions and finding 3/4, you'll notice that you would have done the same steps, because to find 3/4 of a number, we divide by the denominator and times by the top. Divide by 4 times by 3. If you were doing it the ratio way, there actually was other options of that middle ratio of what you wanted to get to. That one just made most sense in terms of actually, yes, they both can be divided by 4, but also, yes, there would be an easy multiple to get back to 300. That's the main thing you're looking for. Don't worry if that was a lot of steps. We've got quite a few questions we can talk through. Just as a reminder, that proportion means that keeping the parts to each other and, in relation to each other the same, but at a different kind of value. If you're now making 10 portions of that ice cream, or as that one happened, you are making less of the ice cream, but the parts need to stay in relation to each other, otherwise the ingredients would then be wrong. Let me show you another one before you have a go. This is Kirsty's recipe for breakfast cereal. She puts in 50 grams of oats, 30 grams of raisins, and 40 grams of nuts. It's kind of making like a granola. If she uses 125 grams of oats, how many grams of raisins does she need? So again, it's telling us about the ratio of one ingredient to the other, specifically oats to raisins. Now, first step is to write my initial ratio. What did I say? Oats to raisins, so 50 to 30. Now I leave a gap in the middle because as we can see, 50 does not automatically get to 125. You could times by decimals. If you thought, well, that times by a decimal, you go ahead and do that now. But everyone else, we need to think of kind of a middle ground. So leave a gap. I know, though, I am trying to get to 125 grams of oats, which will give me my missing value for my raisins. So what you need to stop and think about here is, what could I divide that down to, simplify it to, which would help me get to 125. Now, there's actually quite a few options here. So if you do want to pause the screen and see if you can try that yourself, go ahead and do that. For me, the first thing I would try, and I say try because if it didn't work, I could always go back and try something different, is just nice and simply simplifying them by dividing both of them by 10. You know, I've cancelled out both of those placeholders there. Some of the other options, if you had paused the screen a moment ago, was to half them, get to 25, because then 25 goes into 125 nicely. It's another option. I'm going to stick with this one, so I think it was the most simple to start with. Now that I'm here, I need to think about what I have times by to get to 125. Now, I may want to stop and do a quick bus stop, which is fine. 5 into 1 doesn't go. 5 into 12 goes twice, remainder 2, and 5 into 25 goes 5 times. So actually I times by 25, which means ratio and proportion means I have to do the same on the other side. And 3 times 25 is 75. Now, if you chose something different for this middle section, you should still have ended up with 75. So if you pause the screen and you've ended up with something different, perhaps pause, go back, check your working out. If you manage to think, well, actually 50 to 125 is times 2.5, you could have done that straight away also in one jump. Lots of options with this, but it's about doing the same to both sides. So why don't you have a go at this now? This one is a little bit simpler for you to start with. Here is a recipe for pasta sauce. 300 grams of tomatoes, 120 grams of onions, and 75 grams of mushrooms. Josh makes the pasta sauce using 900 grams of tomatoes. So what weight of onions should he use? So I'm going to write the steps out and then you can do them. These are your steps to finding the answer. One is write the ratio. The way you know which ratio to write is they would have told you, look here, tomatoes to onions. Write the ratio. Write the new value you know. So for this time, it's the tomato value that they told. Use multiples and factors. You might need both this time to find a simplified ratio if needed. And then do the same to both sides to find the final answer. You might not need step 3. If it's a simple ratio already, which I think, if I remember correctly, this one is, you might not need, oops, that's gone very small, 1 second. You might not need to do that middle step of actually finding a simpler ratio before you go to the final. This one I don't think you'll need to. So pause the screen and have a go with these steps. Okay, so let me do these steps along with you now. So we're going tomatoes to onions. So let's start with our original, 300 to 120. Step 2 is write the new value that we know. Now we know that there's now 900 grams of tomatoes, which is this side. Now, as I mentioned to you, we actually don't need to find that middle step here. 300 to 900 is very simply just times 3, which means step 4, we have to times 3 on this side, which gives us, if you can do that in your head, that would be great, 360. So in this new recipe where they use 900 grams of tomatoes, Josh should use 360 grams of onions. I'm going to copy these steps because I'd like you to have a go now. Again, I think this one is a simpler one. You squeeze those in there. Have a go at pausing the screen. For Chen, it's cooking some pasta. The recipe says you need 300 grams of pasta for 4 people. That's your ratio. How many kilograms of pasta does he need for 12 people? Pause the screen and then we'll go through the steps together. Okay, so this time it's not 2 recipes, it's 350 grams for 4 people. I write the new value I know, and the new value I know is 12 people, which goes on this side. Make sure you get your sides correct. I can skip number 3. I don't need a simplified ratio because actually, quite simply, we're timesing by 3. To keep the proportion the same, I times by 3 on this side. You may need to do a method for that, that's fine. Or if not, think 3 times 50 is 150. 3 times 300 is 900. Add those together. 1,000. Oh, it is. I'm glad I didn't write that. That's tricked me. It's asking for the answer in kilograms. That was a nice little challenge. Bonus points if you already saw that. My answer currently is in grams. Now I know there are 1,000 grams in a kilogram, and I've got 1,000 there, which gives me 1 point. I divide this by 1,000, it will give me, to make sure I get it's not just 1.5. If I divide that, jumps 3 times, 1, 2, 3, 1.05. I don't need the final 0, that doesn't mean anything at the end. 1.05 kilograms. Okay, I have got another one for you to try. Let me copy these steps again. Hopefully you can, I'll read it to you as well. Here is a recipe for raspberry ice cream. Yum. This raspberry ice cream is for 8 people. Make sure you always pay attention to something like that. Half a litre of cream, 1 kilogram of raspberries and 250 grams of sugar. Recipe is for 8 people. Josie wants to make enough raspberry ice cream for 12 people. How much cream does she use? So the ratio you're going to be starting with is cream to people. This is one that I think you're going to need a middle step. Pause the screen and I'll be so impressed if you find that middle step at the end. Okay, let's have a go then. Let's see if this is what you did. So it's cream to people. So half a litre of cream to 8 people. And I want it for 12 people. Now, oops, I just did say that I was going to need a middle step here. So really, I should leave a little bit of space. Hopefully you can still see. Okay, 8 to 12 can't be times by anything. Don't get confused by adding or anything like that. I'm going to therefore half the recipe here for 4 people as a middle step. This is step 3, simplifying. That was half. Now, the half a litre is great, but actually now that I'm wanting to do things to it, I'd rather have that in millilitres for now, and half a litre is 500 millilitres because there is 1,000 millilitres in a litre. That's going to help me now because now I can half that on this side. Divide by 2 gives me 250 millilitres. Sorry, this is a little bit messy. You'll be doing it much better at home. Now I can go from 4 to 12 by timesing by 3. And 250 times by 3 is 750 millilitres. But I won't be caught out again. They want the answer in litres. So I need to divide by 1,000. 1, 2, 3 gives me 0.75 litres. I would also accept if you wrote 3/4 of a litre. That's absolutely fine. Okay, I hope that one made sense to you. And that's a good example of one where you did need that middle step, a simplified ratio, to show you that proportion then to go to the final step. Okay, another one for you to have a go at. I'm not going to show you the steps this time, and let's see if you can remember them. So David and his friends prepare a picnic. Each person at the picnic will get 3 sandwiches, 2 bananas, and 1 packet of crisps. The children pack 45 sandwiches. How many bananas do they pack? I will give you one hint. The original ratio you need is sandwiches to bananas, and then you've got your gaps to fill in. Pause the screen, see if you remember what to do. Okay, let's have a little go. So remember what I said? Original ratio is 3 to 2 sandwiches to bananas. Then they pack 45 sandwiches, and I want to know how many bananas that is. Now, using your mental methods, you should have recognized this was times 15. If you didn't and you'd want to divide, that's absolutely fine. But really, 3 does go into 45 15 times. Use your factors there, which means I need to times 15 on this side. 2 times 15 is 30. My answer is 30 bananas. Okay, so if you're working from home, I would like you to do your Teams quiz. If you're working in school, the teachers in school will give you some recipe questions to have a go at. My biggest advice to you is always to write the original ratio. You may need to find a middle step, a simplified ratio, before you go on to find your final ratio. When you've finished with that, if you would like a challenge question, I will leave it here for you to read. If you pause the screen on that and then come back and I will I will reveal the answers. So pause the screen if you'd like to see the challenge. And here's the answer, 15 flapjacks, and there is the rest of the recipe. Really well done, guys. I hope I didn't make you too hungry, and we are finishing off with ratio tomorrow. It's our final lesson on ratio. So I will see you then.